Welcome to Squirrel, the podcast for distracted writers, hosted by Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Squirrel. This is Candace.
This is Jody.
And welcome to episode 43. And I know you're all excited about this. We are talking about writing the Fae Folk. Woohoo!
Yay!
We are both fantasy authors. And
I have never written Fae.
You've never written Fae?
I haven't.
How could you
so
be
this
a
was
fantasy?
interesting
Is it just because
to research.
Just because of the magic that...
Just because I tended to draw inspiration from people who didn't write Fae.
Okay.
That wrote their own universes and
like
their own
more
magic.
Arthurian stuff.
Yeah, well, no, like I wasn't reading a lot of Fae inspired stories when I was in my formative years, and
Gotcha.
So when I wanted to write my own fantasy, that's not the thing I automatically turned to.
Gotcha.
So I imagine your story's a little different.
Well, a little bit. I mean, I grew up believing in fairies. Did you?
Not a ton.
My mom and I would go out. She had like little tiny furniture, and we'd go and put it out in front of the fairy tree. It's just a tree that was at my grandma's house, and
That's adorable.
I felt, and anytime you hear wind chimes, that's when fairies are near. This is the whimsy I grew up with. So no wonder this is how I turned out.
I never had any doubts.
I love the Fae Folk. So the world of Fae has deep history within culture that finds its threads in its origin, and that's hard to pinpoint, right? If you think about the Celts or about any stories in like Germany, they all tend to have, or Russia, old Russia has very deep folklore that it was almost like a religion that incorporated these fun fae that have really ingrained into our specific culture. Now, even not that people specifically believe in it, but that we all know what these fae creatures are and what kind of how their special presence in our lives. Does that make sense? Is that right?
It covers it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I really want to talk about, is these fae creatures that have somehow weaved their fantasy into our storytelling. How's
I
that?
do have Fae experience. That sounds wrong. So
You have Fae experience?
I have Fae experience.
Okay.
I think there's a better way of phrasing that.
I'm sure it is. No, I think it's perfect.
But probably my earliest interaction, like seeing fairies in fiction, was Labyrinth, and they were grotesque and scary, and like
And
the
they would
Goblin
bite.
King, and they would bite, and they're like, "What do you expect?" And like Hoggle would spray them with insecticide, and so like it was not an appealing thought to have fairies around because they were not nice.
I remember there were the pictures from the 1920s or something like that, where these little children were with fairies, and this became a huge, big sensation because they're like, how could they have faked these photographs? This has to be real.
Double exposure.
Well, they didn't know of that at the time, but these
Wanna
girls.
bet?
Well, I mean, but you can look this up. I'll put it in the blog because it's incredibly fascinating how this sensation went with these two little girls who had fairies around them all the time. It was great. So, let's talk about wee ones. Let's talk about the wee ones, the smallest of the fae. And we're talking like the little fairies and the I don't know, whatever else we can think of. What did you come up with?
One of your question was, have we used any of these in your stories? And at one point, I did have small creatures that were they were used by the enemy to vex the good guys. They weren't necessarily fairies. They were closer to insects. But that's the closest I came to using small creatures to cause mischief. But I wanted to do some research on this because there's, like you said, there's a world of history when it comes to the history of Fae. And so there's two different small fae that I found that I thought were really interesting. And one's the Koric. And they're friendly. They sound like cows. They're friendly. They graze on grass.
Okay.
And then there's the Aziza.
And they say moo.
Okay, imagine if it was really, really tiny and it was still a cow. I want one. The Aziza, and this is according to, random Google searches, so your results may vary. The accuracy
You could
may
Google
not
it yourself.
be there. But they say they're the smallest known Fae species at 12 to 20 inches, which sounds too big.
That's too big. That is way too
So I'm
big.
not sure where my sources pulled this from.
Yeah. That's way
Google's
too
AI
big.
is a little interesting these days.
No.
But they're extremely rare. So the Korik and the Aziza were two different fairy species that were reportedly small. And I just like that they just eat grass.
They're little grazers. They're your little goat children. I don't know. I've written a whole bunch of different fae. Honestly, like when it comes to little ones, my favorite is the highthorn fairies that in my series that they grow in highthorn flower. But that's just a thing that I made up.
Gotcha. I'm like, are we trying to say hawthorn? Because
No,
hawthorn is a real tree.
Highthorn flower that looks much like a lily. This is where these little fairies live. But anyway, the fairies in my world were the saviors of the entire series. So we lived them. But do you remember? I love brownies too. Did you
the chocolate ones?
the
Sorry,
special brownies?
couldn't help it. Not that special. People are gonna think we're talking about something else.
They can think anything they want. I am talking about Willow. Do you remember Willow?
Did you watch I remember Willow. It traumatized me.
Oh,
there was a lot of stuff in there that was just like,
yeah. I loved Willow. I remember taking my friends for my birthday. I don't remember how old I was, 10 or 12, or I don't remember. But we all went and saw Willow, and that's when I fell in love with Val Kilmer. And this has been on my watch list recently since he passed away. So Willow had those brownies who wore like little mouse hats. They were mouse skulls, but they were the funniest part. And they were always mischievous. But that, from what I remember, they don't fly. Brownies are just little tiny things. Fairies have the wings and they fly. And I also read a book called the Tolans. But Tolans were much like brownies, but they're like maybe more like Keebler elves. These little tiny tree-like creatures that, I don't know, lived on the ground. But brownies and fairies are definitely my favorite.
So are Girl Scout brownies like the youngest, like the elementary school group of girls were called brownies?
Yes, that's true.
Are they named after Fae?
I wouldn't know. I wasn't no Girl Scout.
I was a very bad Girl Scout, so I don't remember anything.
I was never a brownie. I think I was a Girl Scout for about a year, and then they kicked me out.
Did you not sell enough cookies?
No, I lived in a small town, and the leader, her daughter sold all the cookies, and my parents bought a few boxes because they felt bad. I wasn't a very good Girl Scout. Anyway.
Sorry, squirrel moment, coming back.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the biggest and grandest. We're talking trolls and ogres and orcs and giants and all the other things, right? So when I think about my own question, what are good examples of these? And I put good, like, quick question. I'm not sure I know the difference between goblins and orcs. Do you answer this?
Of course I answer this because, again, nerd. Tolkien used both terms somewhat interchangeably within his manuscripts.
Okay.
However, now that the movies have come out, they have really granulated down that goblins are the smaller, smarter, wittier, faster of the two, and orcs are larger and brutish and somewhat dull-witted. And so there is a difference that way, but both terms existed before Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So they do go back a while, but they became standardized because Lord of the Rings did make them more popular.
Very cool.
So that is your answer.
Thank you.
I like finding answers.
I use trolls in my story. I call them warlock trolls, right? Because of course. But I like the idea of trolls just being kind of an evolution of something that once was awesome and now is just gunky. I don't know. That's what I feel. They evolved around the slime of the world and kind of created this, I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking of Bugs Bunny. Maybe that's why I'm thinking like these trolls are just a little bit like,
I mean, they're very organic.
yeah, there you go.
It feels like they're more closely tied to the earth than they are to other creatures.
Yes. I like the idea of trolls living under bridges. That is true. And even to this day, me and my kids still skip across bridges. Because I said that's how you have to appease the troll. I told them that when they were little, just to make them do something silly and skip across a bridge. Now it's a thing that you have to appease a troll.
Before or after they have to tell limericks or haiku
to
talk to you?
You might have been at the same time. Yeah.
Apparently, I missed out on a bunch of different weird ways I could manipulate my children.
Yeah, who knew?
Pity.
Okay, so what did you say about giants?
The one giant that I think is really charming in fiction is from the BFG, from the Roald Dahl book, because, like, he's really big and he's kind of silly, but he's not dangerous, and he's got a definite role. Like in the story, he is the giver of the good dreams, and the catcher of dreams, and so like I thought that was really, really kind of charming. But do you remember the rock biter from Neverending Story? Because I don't know if he would be considered a troll or a golem.
A golem. I forgot about those.
And I don't know if they fall under the window of Fae.
I have no idea. Or monster.
But he seems golem-esque, but no one made him.
Okay.
So that would push him back into troll territory, but he is made of rock. So I did always feel bad for that guy. I couldn't hold them in my big, strong hands. Thank you. I'm here all night.
Okay, talking about creature creation then. What would be fantasy but not fae?
So there is a huge pantheon of creatures that are technically outside of the Fae realm, and these are the ones I could find, but this is not an exhaustive list. So you've got your dragons, griffins, centaurs, sphinxes, hydras, manticore, minotaur, chimera, selkie, dryad, leshy, wendigo, and this is one I hadn't heard of before, which means I'm probably going to say it wrong, the sepipard.
That I think you said that just fine.
Yay!
A lot of those are Greek.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and these are the other
right?
Other cultural influences coming up with their own creatures of myth, their own monsters, as it were.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also the creatures that appear in Star Wars. I mean, they were made up, but they're based loosely on other mythological monsters.
Right.
So we've got, like, what was the
Sarlacc?
The Sarlacc pit and the race of the Wookiees. And you've got all these very interesting looking races. Some are sentient, some are, banthas, which aren't really monsters.
They're the big elephant type things with hair.
Yeah.
Right. Sand people.
They're beasts of burden.
Okay, yeah, we could lose our minds.
I mean, there's creatures all over the place. So there's lots of examples.
Yeah, you came up with all the best ones. I couldn't really come up with anything besides dragons.
But dragons have like an entire subset of things that are dragons.
Right.
Because you've got the wyverns.
Seems like their own thing.
And I used to have a list of these in my head.
Because dragons, let's just have a quick discussion about this. Dragons in a general sense don't hold magic. They just are magical creatures. Right? So Fae would possibly hold magic? I don't know.
Like in the books I've read, they have forms of magic to them, or they have access to magical things. Like in the Cruel Prince series, I mean, that whole thing is about the Fae court. And they have different, like when they're in the human world, they can turn leaves into money and then use it to buy things. And then after a while, the money turns back into leaves, which seems kind of mean for the bank.
Right?
But
rude. Oh, those tricksters. So, okay, well, fairy courts then.
Yeah, that leads us right into that.
Yeah, so fairy courts I do kind of know about. And this does have a little bit to do with religious Fae dissension. I don't exactly know how to say that. But there are keys to fairy courts in old stories from different sects like the Celts and from Russian mythology, stuff like that. So when I think about courts, if I think about anything that I've read, I know that in the fourth Harry Dresden, it focuses on the Seelie court because there's like the winter court. There's all these different seasonal courts, if I can think right.
Well, and then Akodar banks on the different courts.
All the different courts, yeah.
Yes, I mean that's our modern day example of that being used as a massive plot point.
Yes, right. So yeah, that was one of the things that I liked is those seasonal different courts that people have used in fiction, as you had mentioned before. So, did you find? And you talked about
I did
the Cruel Prince, but
like what I like is it's a really good use of showing a political intrigue within a fantastical setting. And so you've got the assassination attempts, you've got the drive for who's going to be in charge, who's going to be the king or queen, who's going to support them, who's going to oppose them. And normally I don't really like reading political dramas because it's a step back into real life that I'm like, I get into books I'm reading not to read about this. So I haven't finished like the Holly Black series, mainly because I need the political atmosphere to calm down a bit. Mm-hmm. But I do like the way they use the intrigues within that court, because I feel like that seems like a good nod to like a traditional Fae court.
Right.
The way I would have imagined it, at least.
So in speaking of the Fae court and how they rule, would you think that the Fae, they're specifically like devious in any way? Like if I think about the Fae that like fairies not being nice, mm-hmm. they have their own agenda. How would you write your Fae? Would you make them evil?
I don't know. It seems like their moral code is just different. Like, we always take for granted that you probably shouldn't steal, lie, or kill people. And amongst the Fae, it seems like those rules are different. Like, murder isn't that bad of a thing. Like, it seems like they're doing it constantly, so.
Yeah, I'm reading Emily Wilde's The Encyclopedia of Fairies, but right now I'm currently in the third book, and it's all about talking about the execution of the wicked fairy queen. And is she really dead? I mean, we don't know yet, but I'm thinking that she might not actually be dead. But, you know, there is a bloodline that is,
well, and a
like,
sense
for
of
those,
elitism.
Yeah, like they're privileged.
Yeah,
elite
which
is a really great
I mean,
word.
if I was going to try to map a personality onto a Fae character, honestly, it's going to be like the Malfoys in Harry Potter, where they're like, we're
better.
We're better than everybody.
We're
We're purebreds. We're better than humans. We can get what we want. We're an old established family, and it doesn't really matter. Like, we're allowed to do these things because we're special. And so they have this kind of elitist aloofness. They're looking down their nose constantly. Everything is beneath them. But on the same note, the elves that lived in Lothlorien give the same vibe. They're just not as evil. Mm-hmm. Like, they have their own agendas. They don't really care what anyone outside of their circle is involved with, as long as it doesn't bother them. The second it does, they get angry, and justifiably so. They've been living millennia with the kind of life that they're like, this is exactly what we wanted. Don't screw with it. And so Frodo shows up with, a shiny object and lots of problems, and they're like, dang it!
No. Frodo. Okay, characteristics that charm us. What you got? I could only think of like the river sirens, but they're not really Fae, right? But Fae being in some way tend to use a specific kind of charm to woo humans to do things, right? Because they're
just using people,
right?
Generally,
as you said, elite and whatever, but they might have these this magic that charms other people into doing what they need. I wrote, humans are disposable to Fae, right?
Well, and because our lives are so short compared to theirs. I mean, we're like the equivalent of gnats. They're like, you only get that many years? That's nothing. So it's like they feel like it's justified that bad things can happen because we're short-lived. But they're also super attuned with like the natural world. Mainly because they live such a long time, they can see when things go wrong and what started it. Like, they know they're going to be stuck on the planet for a really long time. They don't want that anything that they like to change. They don't want their rivers to be polluted. They don't want, I mean, this is going to go all eco-friendly. But
right.
yeah, I mean, like they have this need to protect their world that's, I think, stronger than their need to like people.
They go all Fern Gully.
They go full on Fern Gully.
Full on Fern Gully.
I also think it's just kind of charming that the fairies are always like these little butterfly-like creatures, but they're like mean. They're always mean. So that, I don't know why, that does make me smile. It's like they're little jerks, and I love it.
Anything else about Fae?
So you grew up with random fairy stuff. Did you grow up with fairy rings?
Not really, no.
So, and I don't know where I got it from, and it wasn't from my family. It was from like some friends of mine, but in grass, if you get a fungal growth like mushrooms in your grass, it'll often form a green patch of grass in a ring where the nitrogen, this is going to be sciencey here, but that's where they produce a lot of nitrogen, and nitrogen makes grass green. And so you'll get these green rings in your grass. I'm making rings in the air for all of you watching.
You can all see the ring.
And there'd be like dandelions and mushrooms and clover, and they'd make these little green rings. But if you stepped in the center of one of these rings, then the fairy could take you. Like it becomes like a portal. And so you weren't allowed to step within the ring because it put you at risk for being taken into the fairy world.
Oh.
And so I remember seeing those and always just carefully walking around just in case.
Oh. That's
just
adorable.
And now I mow straight over them because they're there, but I still need to mow the lawn. And they're not huge.
Screw
There's
you,
maybe
fairies.
like 2 feet. Like, do you know what's best for you? Move fast.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thanks. I'm really glad that we did a thing on fairies. Yeah, I grew up in believing in fairies, and I don't think that ever went away. I still have wind chimes if you go outside. I have a fairy garden in the front of my house. There's lots of things that I do. But as a fantasy writer, I love the exploration of using Fae creatures in my writing if I can. I like to look for inspiration through historical references and stories like that, and legends and folklore, just to understand that world better. And I often wish I could just walk into some kind of enchanted grove and see them. My guardians of nature, right? Listener assignment: seek out the Fae in your neck of the woods. Because I know there is. You just have to search for it. It's there. I have whimsy all over my house, and some I did and some I did not. So you can find it wherever. Okay, Judy, tell us about our next episode.
So I'm feeling a little spring fevery, and I'm also feeling the stress of knowing my kids will be out of school way too soon.
Very soon.
So we are going to talk about how to create a writing retreat at home for just you. It's going to be charming and cuddly and all sorts of good advice. So I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
All right. A huge thanks for listening today. If you've appreciated or learned anything new about fairies or the Fae, and you feel like it's going to make you a better writer, hey, you can give us a tip in our tip jar. Doesn't get old. You can find those links in our description. We have both a Patreon and a Buy Us a Coffee. And while you are looking around that area, there's that handy like button and subscribe button. Use those as often as you like.
Yep. Share.
And share. All right. This has been fun.
This has been fun.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Squirrel Podcast for the Distracted Writer with Candace J. Thomas and Jody L. Milner. Please like and subscribe to our podcast for updates and new episodes. And find more information at our website, squirrelpodcast.com. Stay distracted, everyone.
Oh, we're going to have doorstop books in the next episode. And not in the next episode. It's the next to me. Let's just try that one more time.
Why am I reading my own words?
Because that makes it easier.
But it doesn't. It's awful. Okay, I'll start again. I'll try to read it again. Okay.
Drift. Why can't I talk tonight? Okay.
No, I don't.